Monotype. Welcome to Creative Characters from Monotype, a show where we meet the people designing the future of creative work and shaping our culture. I'm Bill, and this is Carl, and we are your hosts. Hey, Carl.
Hey, Bill, you almost said your name was Carl.
I did.
I heard that.
I almost did. That's an aspirational mistake for me. I try to be more like you every day, and eventually I'm just going to steal your identity.
Well, I mean, my name's fine, but it's not a name to aspire to. Carls in movies and TV shows, Carls are always like the bumbling sidekick or some kind of like hapless bad guy that gets offed in the first third of the movie.
You're right. You know, I should stick to the ever exotic and wondrous name of Bill.
That's my father's name, actually. Have I told you that?
It's everyone's father's name, Carl. That's the point of the name Bill. But you know what is a name that is really wonderful and exotic? Charles Nix, who is infiltrating today's introduction. He's joined us today.
That's right. I'm an introduction interloper.
That's right. So for everyone listening, we are really excited to be here. The episode count keeps going up, and every time we get to produce one of these, it means that we've connected with someone super interesting. And of course, we love having Charles here hosting these episodes. And today he is the host and wanted to kind of join us to give a little bit of background on the conversation.
Yeah, so Two Times Elliott sort of came to my attention through our trends report. And the sort of refreshing thing about looking at Two Times Elliott's work was that there was a lot of different stuff, and it was all of a high level. I could read into it as a designer what was going on there, and it was that there were a lot of different projects, very interesting projects, and they were all driven by concept or by the desire to sort of eke out what the project needed as opposed to replicating a style. And it's nice to meet somebody really great through their work, and I knew immediately I wanted to sort of find out more about Two Times Elliott. Well, it turned out that Rebecca Price at Monotype was friends with James Horwitz and offered to make the introduction. And that was the beginning of what I think is a sort of, I shouldn't say I think, I know it's a friendship with James. We connect on a lot of levels, and most of it is sort of the investment with concept and process. But I think I wanted to hop on with you guys earlier to say the work itself, the product of that process is really great, and I would love for people to go and check out Two Times Elliott's work.
Now, like all of our episodes, we will also be publishing a blog, which will be available in the show notes, and we'll link off to some of the work that Charles is referencing. But also, please, spend some time going and taking a look at the Two Times Elliott portfolio as well. There's no secret why we captured that work as part of that trend. It's just really a brilliant studio, and they do some wonderful design. But I think also this episode will be wonderful for people who are building their own process, people who are trying to figure out how to get to that level of output. And so I think that listeners will get a lot from the conversation. And with that, I think we could probably turn it back over to you, Charles, and to James for today's episode of Creative Characters. Please enjoy, everybody.
I'm here with James Horwitz, who is the founder and creative director at the branding agency Two Times Elliott, and they're based in London, a very sweltering London today. As with all of the sort of things that we include in the trends report, I try and make it a point to go back and look at the other work by the folks that we're including. And when I went to the Two Times Elliott website, James, I saw a bunch of stuff there that made me immediately know that I needed to talk to you. And by that, I mean, it was the range of work that I saw there that really sparked my interest. That it was work of a sort of conceptual quality that generates style and has style, but itself is not chasing style. And that's the kind of work that in my own professional practice I sort of gravitate towards or try to make myself. Stuff that is driven by idea and not by pursuit of style. We're not putting on clothes or decorating cakes. We're trying to find the best solution. So with that introduction, I suppose I can just sort of let you talk to that idea of like where that comes from for you or how you end up there.
Thanks for the introduction, and to be honest with you, I probably couldn't have summarized it better myself. Something that I'm extremely proud of, but also I suppose it's relatively unspoken, but it's thorough through our DNA, is that actually thought and idea and narrative are almost the glue that holds any of our creative outputs together. And in some ways, the general design industry has been led in some ways or nodded towards being just a visual output, but actually we all know that it's significantly more than that, being judged in some way based upon a creative solution in some ways surpasses all of the work and thought that goes into actually coming towards that solution. We started the practice what seems like a very, very long time ago, but in 2010, I came from an advertising background, and it was always quite ingrained within me that the idea, especially within advertising, was almost the key to the success of the output. Over the years of leaving advertising and going and exploring and trying to find my feet, I suppose disappointed at the fact that there was quite a heavy steer just purely on the creative and the aesthetics. There was quite a large reliance on producing visuals that fulfilled clients or a creative community's wants or needs, but actually it was void of that real reason for existence. And one thing that's, well, I suppose one of many things, but one of the key things that's always been prevalent throughout our work, and I think something that you've correctly, and I'm very humbled at the fact that you have identified it correctly, is that for us, the narrative and that consistency of thought is the real reason for me, which is that I think our work remains relatively timeless, because the output is not something that is considered going into the project. I'm hoping that kind of makes some sense. I don't want to go into the really deep conceptual thinking, lighting some candles and some mood music, but I think for me it's searching for that reason for existence. It's why does that brand or that product or that service or that individual have a reason to exist within an already quite populated and densely competitive landscape? And it's our job as creatives, beyond just creative being the physical manifestation of something, it's all of the key attributes from a strategic and a thinking and I suppose a process perspective that actually brings the true value to whatever you present to the world.
Yeah, I think that recently as last week, I was trying to frame the sort of that narrative of design process and creative thinking for some of the internal folks here at Monotype, to describe what it is that makes designers different in the way that they think than people that solve other kinds of problems. And I mean, there's a lot of commonalities with innovators in other fields, but the key is obviously that we do try and innovate. We as designers hate to create the same thing over and over again. Like, it's just a natural sort of repugnant thing to us. But when a customer or a client comes to you and sort of says, like, I want a letterhead, the designer has to say, do you? We have to question the very brief itself and sort of reframe the problem as stated to us, to sort of look for creative leverage and to also make sure that the thing that we're designing is the thing that needs to be made.
That's very true. I think a lot of the time for me, a brief isn't necessarily a list of deliverables. I actually think a lot of the work that we do as directors, as people who are listening to this who are owners, as creative directors, whatever your kind of position of seniority is within a company, I think it's important that we, as design studios, simply being known as someone who can bring a visual solution to life. There's a lot of steps that help to frame the successes of a project. Briefing is almost one of the most important things. It's creating the foundations for a brand to start to build on top of. That metaphor is used quite frequently, the idea of if you don't have the foundations done correctly, you may build a beautiful house and it may sit there for a couple of years, but then you start to get subsidence and the walls fall down and you get probably very angry wives or husbands and kids falling through the holes in the floor. But in reality, it is our job to try and create a framework that provides longer term success than the immediacy of delivery. And I think this is something that actually is a very, very big part of the misconception of the role of a designer, especially within a brand-based studio. I would say our output is extremely varied, but at the core it's brand. It's an exercise to educate a client beyond a list of deliverables. For me, it's more so, what are the goals? What are the reasons as to why you think you need to do this deliverable. You picked up on a very good point, which is, I suppose, more of a style-based point, which is, for me, I do always want to continue to challenge myself aesthetically, but I only want to challenge myself aesthetically if that is, I suppose, fitting for that particular client. I always use this analogy. You create metaphorical boundaries or parameters as to which you could imagine a client within a specific sector to be able to operate within. You have almost the base of that bracket, which is, how do we step in to this industry and create some kind of noise? The other end of it is, how far can you possibly go without becoming unrecognizable within the field? And I think for me, the importance of our job as a creative is to educate the client around the expectations of where that top parameter or that bracket lives, and to not move past that point where you may aesthetically have something that's extremely challenging, disruptive, exciting. But if the end consumer can't articulate that into something they are familiar with, ultimately that brand piece isn't, in my personal opinion, successful. And I think that's why you see a lot of brand pieces, especially through social media, social media in general, Pinterest boards, Arena, all of these kind of places, that they may get shared and they may be interesting, but they very much have a shelf life. They feel as though they very much tackle the request of a consumer for now, but they're not really digging deep enough into the psyche of what a consumer needs to be engaged by that brand longer term.
Yeah, and I think what we're describing, I think, up to this point is pretty much the setup. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's almost like the setup for the joke or for the punchline. But the popular culture, at least designers, like following designers on social media, is all about the punchline. Mm-hmm. It's a bunch of punchlines.
Very interesting, that topic, because I think on our first ever conversation together prior to you coming and joining us on our very own platform, we actually spoke quite a lot about designers for designers. And also we spoke a lot about process and output, and how as a studio, when you're presenting yourself through, for example, a medium such as Instagram, how do you engage an audience beyond a set of very beautiful pictures? Because ultimately, Instagram has become an extremely prevalent, culturally relevant platform for sharing instantaneous, imagery and video to get instantaneous reaction. I would say that actually the captions very much fall as a secondary to the imagery. I wouldn't say that across all things with complete certainty, but I would imagine the majority. And actually one of the way in which we represent our new strategy and visual identity and just the articulation of how we work as a studio and the work that we're putting out is significantly more focused towards the process, the story, the journey, the pivot, the reason as to why we have gone towards that output. Because I always say to my team, 95% of that battle is navigating through that problem with the printers, that disagreement with a client, the fact that two designers may have a different opinion. All of these things lead towards the successful, or maybe not so successful, final outcome that gets seen or digested by a consumer or the world. So the process for me offers more of a learning than actually a lot of the time the actual final output.
Yeah, and I can see that idea of separating design the product from design the process. It's almost as if in the time that it's taking or that you're taking to figure out how to represent the work that you have on Two Times Elliott's website, it sort of speaks to that telling the story of design as a process is difficult because it's much easier just to put up the pretty pictures sort of capture the moments from within the design. But it doesn't really get to the heart of what differentiates your studio from others or your process from others.
It's always a very, very tough one to be able to articulate because ultimately I have believed, and I am now convinced otherwise, that you are very much judged on the aesthetic qualities of the last project that you've put out. I would say that education, more so from what a design studio does and offers, is probably one of the contributing factors to that. But ultimately, it is significantly easier for someone to look at a picture, say, I like that, that's what I want to try and represent through my business. But ultimately, and we know as creatives and the people who listen to this, that brand is so much more than that. Brand is not just a logo sitting on a really beautiful image. There is a reason, if you are doing the process in, I suppose, in the correct way, there is a reason as to why that has gone from being done with a pencil, because I still like to work in that way, all the way through to something that you've even put in front of a client, through to that being approved, and that then being, as I said before, digested by a consumer. There is so many hoops that you go through, so many, I suppose, internal questioning, the decision making, the reason to be self-critical. There's so many steps that come into that in some ways would increase the valuement of that actual process. There are so many things that we engage with on a daily basis as human beings and not as designers that have had so much process, so much iteration to get to the product or the service or the brand that you now are fully engaged with and feel either resonated towards or absolutely hate. Because that's another thing. There's lots of brands that people have a strong opinion on, either positively or negatively.
How difficult is it to find a client who will follow you on that process journey these days? Or what is it like for you to find clients who are willing to go on that journey? Do you often find the sort of people who bring you the picture and say, I want my hair to look like this? Or
the honest answer is, and this is not just because clients may be listening to this, we're actually extremely lucky. The majority of the clients that come to us are already very respectful of the work that we have done. And just due to the work that we've put out over the last 18 months, there's the aspiration of the scaling of certain startups and how they've managed to achieve success over a relatively short period of time that immediately puts and instills some confidence that we are able to deliver as per what we're suggesting to a client. It's rarer nowadays, since the body of work that we are now putting out to audiences, that clients tend to come to us with a visual idea that they want to simply replicate, rather than actually coming to us with more of an in-depth understanding of business principles, reasons as to why they believe their product should exist amongst the other competitors that are already saturated within that space. I wouldn't say that's always been the case. I've had it with a very, very well-known brand, including a brand that we've worked with that we've delivered with quite a lot of success. And I remember quite early on being presented with a mood board of images that was just a load of logos, and the voice in my head was shouting explicitives, but the professional learner that I have kind of, I suppose, realized that actually it's not really the fault of that client. It's more so, how do I guide them through to realize that we don't want to start from a visual point. We want to start more from a tonal point. Imagine the brand being the clothes. There has to be a person inside those clothes. In some ways, there's no point doing the outfit before you know who's going to be wearing them.
I mean, I'm sure there's a great deal of perseverance from your starting years or your early years as Two Times Elliott or as a designer, where you have to prove that process or your sort of lead of the creative will take people to a new place. Because there are plenty of people out there who will lead a client through the sort of expected hoops and create a visual, that will do exactly what we're sort of kind of railing against, which is to not consider the sort of ethos, but instead to concentrate on the visual. There are plenty of people out there who will do that.
Yeah, and I can't ever knock that way of working. It's just, for us, the way in which we've curated the team is there's a shared sense of design is nothing without a concept, and design is nothing without a consistent reason for existence. And I think that leans itself into a relatively considered aesthetic with only the relevant pieces left on the canvas when we go to market. Albeit that there's a lot of work that's going to go out there, and including some recent work that we've done, including for a brand called Fussy, a deodorant brand, which is significantly more complex. But even though it has a large number of different visual attributes that form together, they still have that same mindset. They're only there if they have a reason to be there. It doesn't mean that because there's 200 different things that have to work out a way to live in harmony with each other, that you can't create that cohesion. It's just, if you have that reason as to why they should be there, the designer inside you can then help all of those things to kind of work in unison.
I feel that what we risk here in our conversation is getting people completely turned off to the idea that there does end up being something. That we do end up making stuff. We do end up creating form, and that form has a seductive quality. And I think you pointed to it at the beginning with this idea that it's not just a journey for the client and with the designer, but instead it's how it will all relate to the consumer, the customer at the end. That's the sort of grounding factor, is that it's not just a sort of we hold hands and walk off into the sunset together and create something new. We actually have to think about how the people who will visit this work later will sort of understand it or not understand it.
Yeah, I do agree with you. Obviously, I've probably spoken at length around the reasons for existence, but I suppose the other side of it is, at our core, the one thing that unites us beyond, obviously, us speaking quite regularly now, is a shared love for the creative aspect of it and the visual aspect of it.
So when I was a student, my design mentor at art school, he said, we don't care how it looks until it's done, and then we care very much about how it looks. It's all about getting to the point where you are sure that the solution is the best one, and then you worry about the style. Then you bring everything that you know as a designer to it. Your sort of your ability to discern correctness of form. You bring it after you've decided what it will be.
I'm so glad I have my pen, because that's going on the homepage of our new website. Actually, that is very, very true. Obviously, the importance of process, we both know that. But actually, the aesthetics and the consistent development of our minds creatively is so important. The relevancy of a design studio, being aware of the changing trends of where your work may be seen. And that's not just about where it's seen for publicity. I'm talking more so for how a brand or a business will operate. So where is their brand going to live? Is it going to be a predominantly digitally focused brand that doesn't have retail space? Obviously, that as a studio, if you are 10 years plus, when you were first starting out, digital was less of the focus than it is now. So for us, it's extremely important, even me being a relatively young founder, it's extremely important that we further our creative minds. One of the most important things that we still do as a studio to ensure that we remain relevant, apart from the fact that I have a team of people who are all significantly younger than me, is we do regularly do workshops as a team. The senior designers come together each month to do a workshop with the entire team, which we do as a studio. Everybody from each of the different departments, even outside of creative, get involved in this. And it's an opportunity to get involved with our hands, start kind of ideating together and create within different outputs that we aren't necessarily 100% comfortable or familiar with. Most recently, we did this within taking hand-drawn iconography, taking it into digital tapestry, and then that's being now produced as these large-scale kind of like woven pieces, which are being delivered, I believe, over the next few weeks. The other side of it is taking time out from your process to go and still learn. I am not as active as a designer on the tools every single day of the week, but that doesn't mean I don't still have a desire to be fully aware of everything that's going on within the design industry, the sensibilities of different design studios and what they're doing, teaching and educating myself to be more aware of new processes and ways of making a mark. On a Thursday, we do something called Talking Thursdays, which, Charles, you were involved in, where we invite a different guest that we're inspired by from around the world. And it just furthers, I suppose, our education of, whilst you are a design studio working away, your industry is far broader than what happens between the four walls of your studio. So to be inspired by other sources and other people, and also to kind of, I suppose, reflect, or I don't know if it's deflect, I suppose what we know onto other people is also a really valuable exercise. On top of that, every other Friday, we also go to an exhibition that each member of the studio gets an opportunity to choose to be able to then take the rest of the studio to. So the opportunity for further learning and expanding our reach and disciplines is extremely important.
Of course, the design for clients is one thing, but then there is this design of the life of the studio, which you just articulated in some respects, the feeding of the mind. But then there's how the beginning, middle, and end of the story, how, of course, it began. We could get back to that. But where it is now and the way that you're approaching the feeding and care of the minds that make up Two Times Elliott, and how you see it evolving in the future. How do you see it evolving?
Starting a business, I would say, for the majority of being a sole partner is both a scary and an isolating one. And I have always tried to search for this way of trying to ensure that the studio constantly grows. Over the last kind of 3 to 4 years, we've been very, very lucky that we've had lovely clients, lots of really great people sharing our work and everything like that, which has got our name in front of global audiences, and I can only ever be grateful for that. But for me, one of the main things that has, I suppose, caused us or enabled us to both grow in terms of team size, but also in terms of mentality and mutual respect, is trying to understand that everybody in the studio, obviously they're there to work, but they are still human beings. It's identifying that everybody who makes up the studio has desires, has wants, has interest, a scope of what you can deliver within client work. As soon as we kind of took a step back to realize that there's far more to offer as a studio beyond just commercial work, is where we really started to unlock where our potential could go. So I would say probably for the first 7 years or so, I probably hired incorrectly looking for an extension of myself. People who were able to offer a relatively similar skill set to myself, working very much as a brand being at its core. And I wasn't fulfilled. I would go into work, I would come home, I wouldn't look forward to going to the studio the next day. And it became this monotony. We were producing beautiful work that I'm proud of, and I'm really proud of the team that I had and where they've gone on to be, but I wasn't fulfilled. And the reason I wasn't fulfilled was I felt in some ways that the output was being predefined. And we spoke about this a little bit earlier surrounding our clients coming to you with an output. And at that point, I didn't have a solution to how I questioned an output. I didn't have a solution to underwhelming briefs. And by underwhelming briefs, there were briefs that basically had no information in them, barring a list of deliverables, a timeline, and this is how much money we've got to try and deliver it. And at the time, when you're a growing business, you say, okay, is the budget going to outweigh what it costs me to do it? And you have bills to pay, and you say, okay, let's try and go for it, and hopefully we'll be able to create a better outcome than our last. I realized after we had a fire and our studio burnt down a couple of summers ago, that I had to have a drastic rethink. Both mentally, I needed to recover. It was very, very difficult to try and manage a team through a relatively traumatic experience. And it also...
I can imagine.
It made me question, similarly to what we have with clients, what is our reason to exist? Why should our studio continue to exist amongst the other wonderfully talented studios that are here in London, Europe, the US, and globally? Why should we still be here? I said, do I rebuild a studio feeling the way that I did about the work, going into work, almost knowing what we're going to have coming through the door next? Or do I rethink the way in which we approach our work? Now, externally, we'd always worked with a number of different kind of talented individuals within strategy, within production, within three-dimensional form. But what I was realizing, and the penny dropped, because I was working with these people externally, I wasn't gaining anything from seeing them going through their processes. Two Times Elliott, almost within 6 months of rethinking and restructuring the team, to bringing in individuals within strategy, to rethinking how we creatively build teams, to have people with different interest levels, different strengths within different skill sets, so that the team are not a replication of each other. They are almost, if we were to again use one of my wonderful analogies, trying to find a different person who could play a different instrument within an orchestra. You don't need 5 people who play the piano. You need someone who plays the piano, the drums. And actually, really, that realization, however basic it may be, completely changed the whole way in which I was thinking. My world literally went from being almost as though I was wearing horse blinkers through to this wonderful, colorful world where I was re-energized for the day ahead of me.
Do you think that did you need a fire? I mean, no one needs a fire, obviously. It's so horrifying, but...
Well, there was a fire that was already smoking internally within my mind for many, many years. And I think in theory, it would either have been a physical fire or a complete and utter shutdown, and I need to take some time out of this to reimagine what I want to do. As soon as a creative, if you fall out of love with the path in front of you, or the thought of that path in front of you at any point becomes not exciting anymore, it's very, very hard to become motivated to go and not only go into work, but also see all of the faces looking back at you for instruction. And I think that for me was a real moment of like realization. It's either do or die, really.
Yeah, I had another mentor who said, when we find a system that works better than the one we're using, it's incumbent upon us as designers to adopt that new system. Like, you can't continue pretending that the old one is going to work or that you can retrofit it. Sometimes you just have to take it apart and build a new one, especially if you can see the way clear. And yeah, I think all of us probably, I know I have been in that situation in the past where I've looked across my sort of process landscape and thought, this isn't working and I can't abide. I'll become obese and a heavy drinker if I stay in this situation.
Yeah.
Because I'll do something destructive to myself in order to sort of cope with the fact that I'm not feeling the engagement with the creative process that I was before. And so, yeah, it's often in those situations that I want to take it apart and put it back together or build a new thing.
I obviously feel complete resonance with that. That relates in totality with where I was. And the other side of it is absolutely fine that even 10 years in, those processes are still continuing to change. They don't ever stay the same. As soon as you add somebody else into the equation, there's going to be fresh ideas. There's going to be differences in the way in which you work. It's fine. You can continue to change those processes, but something drastic at that point had to change. The fire was probably the biggest signifier and symbol, not being a religious individual, but a symbol in some way to say you need a fresh start or a fresh way of thinking. And as I said, that from there on, things drastically changed.
Well, so obviously, I don't want to sort of belittle the fact that something really traumatic did happen, but I'd love the idea that out of that comes something so much stronger than what existed before. So let's take that as a sort of a fulcrum point and a moment in the story to sort of go backwards to where you came from, how you ended up becoming a designer and becoming Two Times Elliott eventually.
I'm relatively rare in the sense that I know from a very young age that I was on the career path that I'm still on now. Sounds really strange, but my parents, I remember even being 4 to 5 years old when I was in kind of elementary school or primary school, depending on the audience, saying to my parents, I want to be a designer. And there's my best friend saying he wants to be a fire engine. And it was just not a fireman, a fire engine.
Right.
And I always had this fascination at a young age of taking things apart. I wanted to work out the mechanics of how something worked in order for me to reconstruct it in a way that made me feel as though I completely understood it. This may be a classic case of post-rationalization, but I do believe in some ways it's formed the basis of a lot of my decisions growing up. I think being a young child, I was always a very, very happy one. Art and creativity were always at the core of everything that I did. I would disappear for hours, almost in relative isolation, just to go and make things. Had a very, very happy childhood and had regular art teachers at home during my summer holidays, and that was all really lovely. So as I said, I had a really happy kind of finishing of primary school, and obviously as you finish primary school, you then have the wonderful, but they definitely have it here in the UK, the dreaded entrance exams, depending on the school that you go to your secondary school. And I remember I had a very close-knit kind of group of friends, and due to financial circumstances, they went to one school, and because my parents weren't financially as fortunate at that particular time in my life, I went down a very kind of education-focused, very strict, grades-driven secondary school or senior school. I struggled quite a lot with it, and in fact to the point where from 13 to 17/18, I actually don't remember any main parts of my life. It's a very strange thing. I can't recall with any clarity, really, any moments of real anything that happened in that part of my life. I kind of hid away a little bit. I knew that in some ways my solace was found through music, through creating things, but I didn't understand it. I didn't really understand what it could possibly be. I knew that my education and my school was very focused on grades, league tables, more, I suppose, academic focused studies, albeit that during my we call them A levels here, but during that period it was very much more focused towards the creative arts, such as graphic design and fine art, and the other one, which was business studies, which I hated, but now possibly has helped me a little bit. It's funny how those things happen. But yeah, it was a really strange part of my life. And unfortunately, when I went on then to university, I still followed that career path of going into graphic design, but my solace almost was in music. I found this real passion in being able to shut myself out and find peace in music. I asked my parents for a piano, and I would sit learning how to play, and I did it without any lessons, so I played it all by ear, and I'm pretty good at piano now. But I've always found, without it sounding spiritual, I found peace in the creative process. I found peace in the ability to make something beautiful, even down to cooking and all of these kind of things. For me, it's the process that gets to something wonderful at the end, that provokes a reaction or an emotion in any shape or form. University, again, it wasn't the easiest place. I didn't feel like I fitted in that well. University curriculums, for me, I felt constricted the creative process. I felt, how can you be graded on something that is manifested or curated or created from the human mind? How can we be graded that one thing is correct and the other isn't? Which I'm sure you can kind of relate to. I suppose a creative outcome is based upon a reason as to why it looks that way. So you can't ever really say from an outsider's perspective, that shouldn't look that way. I think it's down to the person who created it.
No, I think you could be graded on how well, and we all are in our daily work, how well we progress from the state that we were in before.
I think that's probably correct when you are retrospectively thinking it and not a hormonal 21-year-old. I think that's probably the way that was more of the problem. The idea then is I want to produce something different to what everybody else is replicating at university, but it's not really understood. And given the reference points back then were not internet, they were still going to the library and looking through old books and everything like that. I wasn't on the internet. It was very much a case of I wanted to go down my direction, and I didn't really care at that point what my tutors were saying to me. I wanted to curate a body of work that for me understood the brief how I wanted to take it, and I wasn't necessarily too upset about what I got as a grade at university. That, unfortunately, continued for quite a long time, that slightly almost self-doubting mentality. So my focus then, and the way in which I was kind of creating my work, very much caught the eye of the ad world at that time. We're talking 2008. That industry was still booming pre the credit crisis that happened. But then everything happened with the economy, and that I was kind of forced out of that field, and by the end of it, I'd kind of lost my love for everything becoming an output that leads into an advert. Like for me, it felt contrived. It felt as though it was one-dimensional. And post that point, graphic design seemed like an exciting avenue, but you basically go from up here to down here. It's almost like you're starting again. But I had a clear and a strong understanding of process. It was still the idea of coming up with a concept, coming up with an idea, taking that through a number of different visual outputs, developing that with a client through to actually going into a much more varied set of outputs. Did some rounds at some of the agencies that still exist here in London, and then said to myself that I'm still not inspired. So how can you create inspiration? And I thought, well, if I do it through my own mind, I have the opportunity to craft the direction in a way in which I want to. And it kind of, I suppose, grew from there. There is obviously a lot of learnings between year 0 and where we are now at year 11. And I think that the studio has hit a maturity in the last 2 years from having, honestly, I am so blessed with the team that I have around me, and the team continues to grow, and I wouldn't be able to do it without those people that I've got around me. But the career trajectory is probably not as varied as some. I took the risk at 24 to start up on my own at Two Times Elliott. And I would like to think, especially with the last few years, we call it Firegate. Post-Firegate, I feel as though we are really starting to make a solid and well-respected name within the industry.
Well, let's talk just briefly about the name. How does it become Two Times Elliott? What does it mean?
I've been prepared for this question because there is something that came up in the studio the other day, which was there was a new person who started. His name's Curtis, and I'm hoping Curtis will listen to this, so I'm just going to give him a brief hello. Curtis sat down at the lunch table with some of the other members of the team, and they said to him, okay, so 2 truths and a lie. And so maybe I'm going to give you the option here of 3 different things as to why it's called Two Times Elliott, albeit I already know that you know the answer, so maybe you have to play along with me here. So here are 3 stories. First is I originally started this up with another business partner, and both of our middle names is Elliot. I was actually the second in line to play Elliot from E.T. That's another one. You know what, let's just go with the first one. It's the first one. Unfortunately, that partnership did not work out as planned. And again, for me, unfortunately, but fortunately, I have a certain work ethic that I'm not going to probably ever move from. I have very high expectations of myself and what I can achieve. And I realize that a lot of things, if you want to have, it's a very big word, is a legacy of some sort, it's going to take a lot of hard work. And that relationship was, it's 6 months in, we haven't made lots of money yet. And I was like, yeah, I know this is going to take at least 10 years. And that's kind of how that story went.
I mean, it's something that I identify with, and I have all my life, actually, this idea that these things are going to take time. Yeah. And I've never had, and it sounds like we're cut from the same cloth there, I've never had this sort of, I must shrink away from this if I can't achieve something really quickly. Like, I'm not looking for the quick win. I want to sort of, the process is fun, and the process isn't necessarily something that happens overnight. I mean, it is the sort of Rome built over over centuries.
It's really interesting, but I think you'll agree with this. In some ways, some of the most difficult memories I have of running a studio have retrospectively led to the most successful work and successful moments in the studio, because you learn so much from messing up. You're only human. You're going to mess up. Even if you're the most senior creative there, you're not always going to have the answers, but that's okay. It's what you take from that experience. It's the age-old saying, but actually it's so true. We would never be where we are if I hadn't have made the mistakes, both as a human being, but also as a leader or as a studio owner. I would never have reshifted my team. I never would have delegated the responsibility. I would have still been on that same path, and the likelihood is Two Times Elliott would be closed. So it's such an important thing to build from within, to give responsibility, to trust those around you, and to realize that The more you do that, the more you end up working towards a common we rather than an I. I don't ever call Two Times Elliott my own. I think that's an important thing to note.
No, and you've set up a structure where you sort of invite that feeling of discomfort that is an indicator of growth or an indicator of opportunity for growth. Like letting go and letting other people sort of participate in that creative process widens the process and lets you know that you're involved in something that's moving forward and not static, the way that replicating yourself in mini partners.
You don't want it to, let's put it this way. You either choose to be closed and don't show the opportunities or possibilities of where your studio or the place in which your employees are going towards. You can do that. You can hide it away and you just give them the briefs, but the likelihood is they will probably go somewhere else for more money. Or you invite them in on that journey. You give them the opportunity to learn and to make the mistakes or to go in front of clients or to have more responsibility and open their eyes to what the possibilities of what this work leads to. And I think this renewed sense of resurgence and energy has led me to be as transparent as possible to ensure that those around me are built up as much as they possibly can be from a responsibility, whether that be of growing in terms of seniority or whether that's leading to ultimately having shareholding in the business. It's all a case of take them on that journey, respect them on that journey, and they will stay there with you for that journey. That to me is the thing that keeps me driven every single day, that I genuinely do believe that those around me are excited by the prospect of where we're going, and they've been involved intrinsically on some of those late nights, on pulling that extra 5% in to make a project really successful, because they genuinely believe in where the studio has the possibility to go if we join together, as opposed to being a boss-employee style kind of relationship.
No, and it gets to that idea of a true idea of studio where all are participating in the making of something bigger than any of the individuals could make themselves.
Well, that goes just slightly, and I know I probably haven't got a huge amount of time, but it does go slightly back into one other topic of conversation, which we did briefly touch upon, kind of creativity and kind of further development of the creative mind. And one other small point that I do see as being relevant to the previous kind of dialogue that we just had was we actually put a lot of emphasis on trying to understand what creatively the people within the studio actually would like to do more of, or where do their aspirations take them that their current career trajectory currently won't allow you to do. And so a big part of our mentality is how do we create opportunity for self-initiated work that's framed by the studio to allow us to operate within disciplines that probably commercial clients won't give us that opportunity to do, such as it's very unlikely that a graphic design studio, given our body of work, is probably going to be approached by a furniture brand to design or co-design a furniture range. It's very much the mindset of you go out and you go to try and create your own opportunities. If we are saying that we want to do that, what stops us as creative individuals from doing so? So we actually sit down with our creative team, as well as our management team, as well as our accounts team, as well as our strategy team, to identify where are their interests beyond the commercial work that's put in front of them on a weekly basis. And we try to create a framework to best support how we can deliver that idea with the benefits of being within a commercial and a studio setting to create outcomes that are not in line potentially with what we would be delivered from a creative brief standpoint.
Do you feel like this line of thinking of sort of extracurricular development and sort of feeding needs that are greater than the client work, do you feel that is the future of Two Times Elliott? Is that the evolution? Is that where it is 10 years from now?
Without going into all of my secrets.
Speak broad strokes then.
We can speak broad strokes. I think that the studio will probably develop down a number of different avenues. I think we've already tried and tested the waters within other disciplines of where we think and where we know we can be successful and where our minds allow us to operate within different strands of business that we don't currently do. I would say collaboration is probably a key part of where the studio will develop towards. Co-branded efforts, co-branded self-initiated startups, additional businesses that form around what we do as a practice is a little bit of a hint as to where we're going to go. I have a very strong sense that I don't want the studio to be bigger than me being able to know what any colleague's dog's name or mother's name is. So I think for us, we're getting close to that point of being bigger than a small studio. I think then the future plans from there are to then look at other areas around the world that we could potentially set up the same ethos and mindset, design style and kind of approach in other cities.
Well, as usual, I have enjoyed immensely talking to you, and I always learn something new. I feel though that we got through this entire conversation without really talking about typography, without really talking about the physical manifestation of anything that you or I have worked on separately or together or whatever. But I hope that folks will take it as it's intended, as sort of inspiration for investigation or investing in your own process, and sort of trusting that process, or trusting the sort of idea of not knowing and following it to where it needs to go by listening to the process.
We should just say typography is great now and graphic design is wonderful. And then we've covered those two bases at the end. I like your work, yes, you like my work, and there we go, we've done it.
Well, it's been great, as usual, talking to you, and I look forward to future conversations.
I'm really hoping now that with the rules with flying, we can come and bring the studio over to your space in New York. It would be wonderful.
I was thinking that same thing this morning. It was like getting together and actually having a session like one of the working sessions that you talk about with your studio would be really grand.
Well, we can always extend our workshop structure that you and your team can run, so we're very open with those. We've done that as open sessions before, so we've done live and over kind of like Zoom and platforms like that, and where we've invited externals in to learn. So always happy to share. And if anyone obviously wants to reach out to hear more about graphic design, they are more than welcome to reach out as well.
Oh, and I should, before we sign off, just beg people to go look at your work on Two Times Elliott and to read the stories, and hopefully visit again in a couple of months when you've reworked it and sort of brought a new sort of
pre-Christmas.
Yes. A new narrative structure to the way that you show your work. It's fantastic work.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to seeing more.
Thank you. Well, I can share it with you. You can have the preview.
Cool. Thanks, James.
Thank you very much as always.
Thanks for listening. If you want to learn more about James or Two Times Elliott, check out twotimeselliott.co.uk. That's the number 2, lowercase x, elliott.co.uk. Or visit our blog post at monotype.com/podcast. If you're enjoying Creative Characters, please head over to your podcast provider of choice to rate and review this episode. Even better, subscribe to the show and share us with your friends. Creative Characters is a production of Monotype and Christopher Sound with Marie Tabarez. We'll be back soon with more episodes. See ya!